Hey everybody, and welcome to Your Own Book Show on this Friday. What is it? It's noon here in California. Hopefully, you're having had a great week and are looking forward to a fantastic weekend. Thanks everybody for joining, and we've got today. We're gonna, I know the hour is a little weird today. I told you I was experimenting with different hours. Also, being on the road, it's kind of difficult to know exactly what hours work and what hours don't. So we'll see. We'll see what kind of viewership we get on a show that is in 3 p.m. East Coast time and noon Pacific time. If you like these hours, get your friends to come and load up the numbers on the watching live, and of course also work on get the super chat going, because that'll be another parameter that determines whether this is something these hours are good hours or not. All right, so let's see things we have to do. So today we're going to talk about the 80,000, 87,000 new IRS agents that are being hired as part of the Inflation Reduction Act. It's a funny name, but the Inflation Reduction Act, given that it increases inflation. It's like Orwell's 1984. Reduction means the exact opposite of what it's supposed to mean. But as a consequence of the Inflation Reduction Act, there is a lot of kind of hysteria. There's a lot of panic. There's a lot of angst around this idea that the IRS is not going to have 87,000 new IRS agents, and they're coming down on us, and we should barricade our doors and get our guns because they're coming at us with guns, and on and on and on. There's a lot of panic out there. From journalists, politicians, Twitter, the media, and everything like that. So we'll talk about it, try to bring some objectivity to this number that has to do with IRS agents. And then we'll talk about a bunch of news items that I just put together. Update on Salman Rushdie and update on some infighting within the Trump camp, which I found interesting. We'll talk about Republicans' chances in the midterms in the Senate, according to Mitch McConnell. And then I've got some news items about trans, one about Boston Children's Hospital, and some others. Anyway, we got a couple of stories about trans, and then and a bunch of other stuff. And we'll end on a positive piece of news coming out of the FDA. A positive piece of news coming from the FDA. There's a new one for you. CES. We've got a full agenda. Also, I know that I still owe a bunch of super chat questions from last show and the show before that, because for some reason the hotel Wi-Fi seems to shut me down after an hour and a half. So we're definitely not going to go over an hour and a half today. And we will, I will cover all those old super chat questions. So if you want to ask super chat questions, make them $20 or above, because those always get priority. And because the lower ones, there is a chance, because we only go an hour and a half, that they spill over into next show. And next show is going to be a while. Right now, unless something changes, and something could change, the next show will be on the last Tuesday of the month, so like over a week from now. I'm taking next week off. I'm going to be in Northern California, not doing anything show related. I've got some other business to do, and then we'll be back to the show when I'm back in Puerto Rico at the end of the month. So we'll get to that. Glenn, thank you. Glenn just stepped in with $50. Really appreciate that. Glenn, he's put us on the path to 650, which, as you know, is the super chat goal. All right. So let's jump in here. I'll just mention, just on the raising money front, I'll just mention that if you want to support the show, and if you listen to this in a podcast or on a YouTube after the fact, and you're not here live and you can't use the super chat, then I know many of you already support the show on a monthly basis. Thank you for all of you who do that. We've got people who do $2 a month. We got people who do $500 or $1,500 a month. So you can do anything in between. You can do that on Patreon or Subscribestar, or on, I think the website is not fixed, so you can do it on PayPal. on youronbookshow.com/support. You can go there and do it. Again, that is the number that to me is most indicative of the growth of the show, and the number of people who are on there and who are on there, but who are giving on a monthly basis. That to me is the best indication of how the show is going. So that number is growing, but it's growing slowly. We need to grow it a lot faster, and to really get us to where I need to be, we need to grow it at about 50%. So really, there are thousands of people who listen to the show, only hundreds who actually contribute on a monthly basis. It would be great if we got over 1,000 people. We got 33,000 subscribers. Every one of these shows is watched on YouTube between 2,000 to 3,000 times, listened to on a podcast, and another 2,000 times about. So we've got 4,000 or 5,000 people watching every show. It would be great if 25% of those actually contributed financially. Of course, it's not the same 4,000 to 5,000 every show. So we've actually got a bigger universe of people listening to the Yaron Book Show. It would be great if those of you who don't yet support, and if you feel like you're getting value from the show, would provide value for value by becoming a monthly contributor to the show. Patreon, Subscribestar, or youronbookshow.com/support. All right. Let's see. Where are we? Let's start with IRS story. So the IRS story is, I think I talked about it a little bit when I talked about the Inflation Reduction Act. Part of the Inflation Reduction Act is $80 billion, $80 billion with a B dollars to the IRS, and many conservatives, many people on the right have plucked out the number of 87,000 new IRS employees are going to be hired, and that this is going to be massive new audits on Americans, massive intrusion on us. This is doubling the size, more than doubling the size of the IRS in terms of people, and this is just, it's coming, right? And start worrying. You should start really thinking about this. You might get audited next year. This is imminent. So I want to calm you down, because while I hate the idea, despise the idea that the IRS is getting $1 more. I mean, I'd like to see the IRS shrinking, not expanding. And while I hate the idea that the IRS hires anybody, it's not as bad as it's being made out to be. Don't panic. The world is not going to come to an end. So let's start with the fact that, one, the $80 billion that the IRS is going to get is spread over 10 years. So this is dollars going into the IRS in chunks over 10 years. So it's not that it gets it tomorrow, and it's not that it can go out and hire people tomorrow. Even if it got the money tomorrow, even if it tried to hire 80,000 people tomorrow, where are they going to find them? There are not 80,000 people waiting there just to get IRS jobs. Indeed, right now there's a shortage of CPAs. There's a shortage of accountants. The private accounting firms are paying huge salaries to attract new graduates out of college. The IRS can't afford people. Part of the reason they're getting this money is, we'll get to it, they can't hire people because they can't pay them enough. So they're going to have to boost wages. And who wants to work for the IRS? Most of the good people are going to go to work for your accountants. One of the reasons not to worry about the more hires in the IRS is the people they hire are pretty incompetent. They don't know anything. They're not very good at auditing. So I just wouldn't worry even if they were. But they can't hire 80,000 people tomorrow. There's no way. Even if they were going to hire 80,000, and they're not, it would take them 10 years to hire them. They're only getting the money over 10 years. And it would take them, even hiring 8,000 people a year for the IRS. Remember, IRS is a government bureaucracy. It would take them forever to do that. Think of just all the kind of affirmative action stuff they would have to go through. It's just, there's just no employees out there to do it. Now, add to that the fact that they're not actually hiring 80,000 people to go and audit you. They're not even hiring 80,000. The number's probably closer to 60,000. But why are they hiring 60,000? It's not 60,000 in addition to what they have today. It turns out that half of the people working for the IRS today, and I think that number is about 80,000 existing people working at the IRS today in all kinds of jobs. Half of the people working for the IRS today are about to retire. So over the next 10 years, half of the employees at the IRS are going to retire. So a big chunk of these new employees are just replacing existing employees. Just replacing existing employees. So another reason not to work. Additionally, the people that the IRS is likely to hire, they're going to hire some auditors, partially to replace the people who are retiring and to increase the number of auditors that they have. But a lot of the people they're going to hire have nothing to do with auditing. They have to do with IT. The IRS has primitive computer systems, thanks God, which is good, right? So they're slow, they're inefficient. They're going to hire IT people. They're going to hire programmers. They want to improve their IT infrastructure and they want to improve customer service. Do you know that 90% of all telephone calls, 90, I think it's actually 89, so maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit. 89% of all phone calls into the IRS are not answered. Just not answered. And I was talking to an accountant, when was it? A couple of days ago, having dinner, and one of the guys there was an accountant, a tax accountant, and he says he often calls the IRS and gets somebody on the phone and asks a complex question. A real complex question. He's really asking a question for a client, right? Asking a question, and the guy goes, let me see, let me ask, and hangs up. And they hang up because they don't know the answer, because they're not sophisticated. So the idea is the IRS wants to improve customer service, which is to get more people on the phone to hang up on you when they can't answer the question. They'll be having a lot of IT people. I think if you think about the $80 billion that are going, who's going to get this money? Who's going to benefit from this? Well, some people will be hired, so they're going to get some people hired. But most of the money is going to go to contractors. Most of the money is going to go to government contractors. It's going to go to people who, DC is booming. DC always is booming. I was in DC in the summer. Construction everywhere, building everywhere, new condos, new office buildings, everything booming. Northern Virginia is booming. Maryland is booming. Anybody associated with government is booming. Why? Because they always are spending more money. There's always bigger budgets, and they're always allocating that to contractors who live in the DC, work in DC, because that's the way they provide services. Most of this is going to go to outside contractors, outside people. I mean, it's corrupt. It's insane. They're going to charge them, what is it, $50,000 for a hammer or a toilet or whatever. Typical government rates, government fees. They're going to, but this is not going to go directly to the bottom line to auditors to go after you. So while it's never good that the government's spending more money, and it's never good that that money is spent on the IRS, and it's not good that they improve their computer systems and they get faster and more efficient, I'm not too worried, partially because how much faster in 10 years, over 10 years, how inefficient is this going to be? How good of a programmers are they going to get? It's just not going to happen like that. It's not going to happen quickly, and it's not, I don't think, going to be particularly devastating. So I say it's horrible, complain about it, bitch about it, do everything, but don't panic and don't be afraid. And this is generally my advice, right, on most political things. But I find that every time there's something in the news, everybody flips out and goes crazy, and this is the end of the world. And including, the Republicans who have every incentive to say this about the Biden administration and to let you know how terrible this is and how awful this is. And again, this is the end of the world. It's not. It's just not. Everything's going to be okay. So, it's just one more government boondoggle, one more government disaster. But in terms of actual net increases to IRS employment, yeah, but it's nowhere near the numbers that some people are putting out there. IRS is going to get bigger, which means, in my view, more bureaucratic. The IRS will have a lot of investment in computers and software and stuff like that, which will take forever and be inefficient. But overall, is the IRS going to get more sophisticated? Probably not. Is the IRS going to get more efficient? Probably not. Is the IRS going to have massive new resources to go after you, me? Probably not. Maybe at the margin, but probably not. All right, I'm open to any questions you guys might have on the super chat or anything about the IRS, but I don't see any right now. So we'll move on to some of the other news items that are out there. All right, so IRS panic, Inflation Reduction Act disaster. Inflation Reduction Act increasing inflation. Inflation Reduction Act increasing government spending, increasing involvement in the economy. Disaster. IRS coming after you and gonna be going after you tomorrow? Probably not. All right, let's see. All right, I wanted a quick story on Salman Rushdie. As you remember, I did a show on Salman Rushdie a few days ago, and I think the day he was shot. Just a tragedy, horrific. So the good news is that he is out of danger. He's definitely going to live. The bad news is it looks like he's lost one eye, which is just awful. I mean, he's lost one eye, and he might lose the use of one of his arms. So just horrible. I mean, imagine being stabbed 50 times in the eye and the neck, and severing, I guess, nerves down to the arm, and losing an eye. It really is horrible. But I discovered something additional that's horrible, and this is just so typical of the world in which we live, and the kind of the unwillingness of people to make moral judgments and to act on moral judgments. Particularly when it comes to, they'll make moral judgments on the left, they'll make moral judgments with regard to what they perceive as the right, but they won't make moral judgments on things like Islam. They won't make moral judgments on Muslims because they are part of one of these so-called supposed oppressed groups, even though I think there are just as many Muslims in the world as Christians, or very close, or maybe more. So there's a professor at Oberlin University, I think it's in Ohio. Yes, Oberlin College in Ohio. It's a liberal arts college. It's quite left. By the name Muhammad Jafar Mahalati. And it turns out that Muhammad Jafar Mahalati is Iranian and actually served as Iranian ambassador to the United States in 1989. That is the same year that Iranian Supreme Leader Khomeini issued a fatwa for the death of Rushdie. Right? Now, what is hard to comprehend here is that when Mahdi was in this position in Iran, right, he supported the fatwa. He literally said that Iran has every right to put a bounty on an author's head because they insulted Islam. And then not only that, that Iran was supported by many Muslim countries that agree with it, at least in private, and a billion Muslims who feel offended by Rushdie and think, I think this is the exact quote. So here's the exact quote. I think all Islamic countries agree with Iran. All Islamic nations and countries agree with Iran that any blasphemous statement against sacred figures should be condemned. Now, condemned, fatwa, killed. Now, this guy today is a professor at an American university. An American university, the supposed symbol of free speech, academic freedom, the supposed symbol of, liberal in a positive sense, liberal in a classical liberal sense, a liberal world in which people can feel free to offend. That's what free speech means. Has he been asked to retract his statement? No. Has he made any comments since Salman Rushdie was stabbed? He's still a professor at this college. No. I mean, this is outrageous. Why would somebody like this ever be hired? On what grounds? Now, know that he teaches classes on peace. I mean, he teaches some on Islam, but he has a whole class on peace studies. Now, what is the university even thinking? Now, on top of this, Amnesty International, now granted, I don't trust Amnesty International. You shouldn't trust Amnesty International. We kind of quote Amnesty International when it's convenient. But, this is a fact, and somebody should investigate who's more objective than Amnesty International. But Amnesty International accuses Maladi of being part of an Iranian cover-up of the murder of 5,000 dissidents in Iran, and that he was part of the cover-up of this. The university can say, they looked into it, nothing serious. But this guy was an ambassador of a brutal, theocratic regime. He wasn't a dissident. He didn't escape that regime. He was part of the regime. How can anybody who is part of the Iranian government in the 1980s and 90s, the Iranian government headed by Supreme Leader Khomeini, a horrible monster, against every value that American university represents? How can somebody who's part of that government be a professor at an American university unless they repudiated everything? Fine, you made a mistake, you were young, repudiate everything. And even then, I would have questions, but no sign that he's repudiated anything. No sign, other than that he teaches a class on peace studies. Khomeini was very much a man of peace. When the university some of the Iranian dissidents have gone to the university and demanded they fire this professor, very little. Right? No response right now from the university. No response from him on the stabbing of Rushdie. I don't know. This is just so. It's so outrageous. It's so absurd. It's so ridiculous that these people, that American universities. I wouldn't be surprised, by the way, if the position is funded by the Saudis, or the position is funded by the Qataris, or the position is funded by some Arab money, and the university doesn't want to lose the Arab money. Our universities are so corrupt, so morally corrupt. It's off the charts. It's off the charts. And this is another example. There are plenty of examples in, all the woke stuff and all of that. Those examples of. Let me see. I think we got some IRS questions. So let me just quickly, browse these and see. It's amusing to watch people on the right. Yeah, this is Cook saying it's amusing to watch people on the right freak out about tax enforcement after spending the last 4 to 6 years defending and supporting tariffs. Yes. And of course, it's not like they're against the people on the right, supposedly, particularly the nationalist types, are for the enforcement of IRS rules. I mean, they're anti-rich people. It was Trump who made it more difficult for American companies to, in a sense, to shift their taxes overseas. It was Republicans voted as part of a bill that was passed under Obama to make it more difficult for people to leave the United States, to give up their citizenship in order to shield some of their income from taxes. It's not like, Republicans are anti-taxes or Republicans are anti-strict IRS enforcement of the tax code. Quite the contrary. They are statists and they strongly believe in a strong, powerful, effective IRS and strong, powerful laws that go after people to make sure that they pay all their taxes or, quote, their fair share of taxes. So, Republicans being hypocrites here, but, hypocrisy, and tariffs is just one form of taxes, but hypocrisy is nothing new to politicians of both sides. Harper Campbell says, they typically audit people making $150, $250 a year. Those people have enough money for IRS to skim off the top while not having enough money to hire fancy lawyers and accountants. Yes, and it's also those people typically file relatively simple tax returns. If they go after people making, let's say, 5 to 10 million, they probably have very complex tax returns. They probably have a variety of pass-through entities. They probably have a bunch of different things. And those people are much more difficult to get. They're much more difficult to deal with. And they would need to be, the IRS would be a lot more sophisticated in order to handle those kind of tax returns. But exactly, those are not the kind of tax returns the IRS goes after because of exactly the issue. It's too hard. It's too hard. All right. Okay, let me just do this, and then we'll go on to our next story. I'm just going to go through a bunch of interesting, I think interesting stories. We'll do this quickly. Okay, so the next one is just a little bit of infighting within the Trump administration, former Trump administration. It's I just find this funny and entertaining. Maybe you will too. And I know, there were a lot of Trump-related stories this week that I'm ignoring because I don't think we know enough to figure out. We still don't know much about the raid, and we won't discover much even when the information comes out that the judge is now about to release, because it's going to be redacted, so we won't know anything. But it'll feed the news cycle. So until this actually goes to court or doesn't, we won't know much about the raid and what they found and all this stuff and reasons for the raid and all that. So I'm not jumping on that quite yet. But this is an article that was published this week. But if you remember, if you followed me in the Trump years, my favorite Trump official, my favorite Trump advisor of all was a guy named Peter Navarro, who was his advisor on issues of trade. I'd met Peter Navarro a couple of times because he teaches at the University of California in Irvine, which is, right here in Orange County in Irvine, where I was based for many years. Used to bump into him quite often. Peter Navarro is in my book maybe the dumbest economist around. Maybe the only economist I know that rejects benefits from trade and doesn't get the whole trade issue. Really somebody I despised and disliked and thought, and basically, unfortunately, he was one of the people that had Trump's ear from the beginning and that Trump really, really followed. Anyway, Peter Navarro lasted the whole of Trump. He was one of the first hires that Trump made and survived the whole thing, everything. Never resigned, was there for the entire 4 years. And was advising Trump on, part of his inner close team and advising him how to stay in the White House in spite of losing. And, so he's a real Trump guy. And I think started a think tank, or part of a think tank that is trying to, or part of a group that's trying to create an agenda for Trump for when he wins in 2024. So this is a guy who has plans to join Trump in 2024. Well, what's interesting is he wrote this op-ed, or this article for the American Greatness website, amgreatness.com. I think that's the name of the think tank, maybe American Greatness Institute or something like that. Anyway, he wrote this article basically ripping Jared Kushner to shreds, right? Here's a quote. Kushner came to DC Swamp on the coattails of his wife as nothing more than a young and rich, run-of-the-mill liberal New York Democrat with a worldview totally orthogonal to the president he was supposed to serve. Yet, within the West Wing, Kushner considered himself to be the ultimate Trump whisperer. He was. This thing goes after the Trump presidency. Whatever failures it have are all Kushner's fault. Because every time people tell me that why don't I like Trump, I mention stuff and then they say, but what about the Jerusalem Accords or whatever? What about the moving the embassy? What about the peace deals with the Arab countries? And all of those are Kushner's achievements. All of those were done by Kushner. But Navarro hates Kushner, and he just goes after him, right? Just after him in this article, and just rips him to shreds. Kushner ran the campaign in 2020, and basically Navarro, and he claims Bannon agrees with him that Navarro and Biden. Navarro and Bannon, Steve Bannon, basically argue that Kushner lost the presidency for Trump, that it was all Kushner's fault, which I find interesting. Kushner's still Trump's son-in-law. Maybe, I can't believe that this was published without Trump knowing. I can't believe that this was published without kind of the inner circle knowing. Is this their way of pushing Kushner out and making clear that a next Trump administration will not have Kushner? I don't know. It's interesting. The last paragraph of this is, he writes, fortunately, if Trump makes it back to the White House, it will be a Kushner-free zone. Kushner has already disqualified himself from future White House employment. And this is something I've been saying for months now. You guys can testify to this. Kushner has already disqualified himself from future White House employment by cashing in on the White House connection to fund his many entrepreneurial ventures, right? We talked about the private equity fund that the Saudis gave Kushner a bunch of money. So I wonder if there's going to be investigations about Kushner cashing in on his White House connections to fund his many entrepreneurial ventures. I wonder if this is going to make it into the Hunter Biden laptop story, that children of ex-presidents are corrupt. I don't know, some heading like that. So it'll be interesting. So I thought it was a fun story and interesting. Let's see, we're gonna skip the IRS, that story. We're gonna skip that. And yes, Jennifer, I think Dumbo economist is a good way to describe Navarro. I mean, he's one of the worst. Kubadada says Navarro must have coached him on the tariff issue. Trump, no. The reason Trump hired Navarro is because Trump always agreed with Navarro. Trump has been anti-trade, not just anti-China trade, anti-trade since the 80s, since the Japan, when he was anti-trade with Japan. So Trump is anti-trade forever, and he found a kindred spirit with Navarro, and that's why he hired Navarro. So Navarro was hired because of his anti-trade credentials. It's not that he convinced Trump to be anti-trade. It didn't work in that. It doesn't work in that direction. All right, let's see. Where are my other stories? There they are. All right, so that was just quickly. I've talked about this before. I've talked about this before about Republicans probably not being able to take the Senate and really taking a hit in the polls. I mean, the polls have flipped. The generic polls had Republicans way above Democrats. Now it's flipped. Democrats are above Republicans. That usually indicates success in the House of Representatives. Polls in local state elections, Ohio, which is a solidly red state, the Democrat is very close and in some polls ahead of J.D. Vance. In Arizona, where Republicans thought they would pick up a seat, the Democrat is ahead. If you go state by state, it looks like Democrats are going to make real gains in the Senate, which just a couple of months ago, it looked like Republicans were going to take the Senate, take the House, it was going to be a big red wave and sweep it. Now it could still be. We know polls are unreliable. But this is Mitch McConnell this week. Mitch McConnell this week said, I think there's probably a greater likelihood the House flips than the Senate. There's an admission, right? Again, just a few months ago, he was very positive about taking the Senate. Senate races are just different. They're statewide. And this is the key sentence. Candidate quality has a lot to do with the outcome. Now, two things. One, he's saying in the House, candidate quality doesn't matter. But the other is he's saying we have shitty candidates. We're not going to take the Senate because we do not have good candidates. And this goes back to what I've been telling you, that the candidates that Trump endorsed, that Trump gave a huge boost to, that Trump has supported so far, at least, it could all flip by elections. It's very dangerous to make election predictions. Could all flip before November. But at least as of now, these candidates are not gaining traction in the general public. They're not getting traction among independents. They're not getting traction among, we'll call it more moderate, Republicans or suburbans. It's interesting that a poll I saw this morning shows the Republicans, one demographic, Republicans are losing support, which is surprising because they had huge support in this demographic just a few months ago, is dads, fathers, fathers of young children, fathers of children that are still home, which Republicans were dominating when the discussion in the press and in the news cycle was all about education, all about schools, all about woke, and all about the nutty left. Now these dads are flipping. Again, we'll see what happens in the actual election, but that is certainly a part of the story. All right. Let's see. All right, let's do the $20 super chat questions, and then I'll go back to some of the news stories I have, and then I'll run through the other questions. Of course, you can participate in this, and you can also help support the show. Stephen, thank you for the support by using the super chat to ask a question. $20 questions today if you can, because I've got a lot of lower dollar amount questions that were asked in previous shows that I need to catch up on today. All right. This is a question from last time. I started answering. I don't know that I completed it, so I'll just try to recreate some of my answer from yesterday or the day before yesterday and add to it. And that is, do you think that American culture today celebrates romanticized white-collar workers more than blue-collar? And I was saying it depends by whom. It certainly seems these days that the Republicans, generally the right, is trying to celebrate blue-collar workers. It's flipped. And then, of course, the left claims to celebrate blue-collar workers, but since its primary base is in white-collar workers and is the elites, in what are called the elites, the wealthy, they celebrate that more. So I don't think anything is romanticized today. I don't think work generally is romanticized today. I think I don't think there's I think everybody wants a blue collar worker because they feel like that's real work, and so everybody ultimately that's what they're going to romanticize. There's no romanticizing, and I don't think there is any romanticizing white collar workers, although those are the dominant voters for the Democratic Party, unfortunately. Unfortunately, Democratic Party voters more educated and have better jobs, wealthier generally, and have better jobs in terms of blue collar, white collar. They're the white collar jobs typically. All right, James asks, most people are airheads. If they want objectivism, they would have flooded academia and the culture within a decade after Atlas Shrugged was published. So depressing how we're surrounded by mindless tribal children. Yeah, I mean, most people are, Linda, thank you for the support. Really appreciate it. Most people are, I wouldn't call them airheads. I think Ayn Rand, identified them pretty well, and that is most people are still at the perceptual level on important parts of their life. They're not fully conceptual. They don't take the conceptual world, the world of thought, the ability to think, the intellectual world. They don't take it seriously. They don't take it. And intellectuals are the worst. They stay at the perceptual level when it comes to abstract ideas. And she called it the anti-conceptual mentality. And I think, unfortunately, so much of our world is dominated by anti-conceptual people. And yeah, there's a sense in which Atlas Shrugged should have stimulated everybody to go and flood objectivists to flood academia. It didn't, because it's hard. I think we all have an underappreciation of how hard it is when you're raised on the kind of educational system that has existed in America for 50, 60, 70 years, when people are so dedicated to their religion and their Christianity and their community, when people are so dedicated to the altruism that is all over the culture. It is so difficult to be radical. It is so difficult to flip. It is so radical to embrace something completely different and completely radical and jump on a new philosophy. So it's a challenge we faced, and it's a challenge that by necessity takes decades. Michael asked, the intentions of people who want you to believe their senses don't tell you about reality, your senses don't tell you about reality, or that there is no reality, are trying to make you go insane. Looking forward to those unanswered Super Chat questions. Yeah, I mean, we're getting to them, Michael. Well, they're not really trying to make you go insane. Look, I mean, this goes back to Plato. I mean, Plato's cave. This is Christianity. You don't really know God. Only the Pope knows God, and therefore you must follow commandments, follow instructions. What they want is power. What they want is control. What they want you is to feel helpless, not insane. They want you to feel helpless. They want you to be under their thumb, right? And, it's, that is their goal. Their goal is power. Their goal is to be the philosopher kings. Their goal is to substitute their own judgment, to substitute themselves for your senses and for your mind. I'll just comment quickly on Joe's comment here. Trump's approach to his cabinet was like his approach to real estate: get a diverse group of people to attack a problem and let the chips fall where they may. I mean, that's very benevolent of you, but I don't think that was even true. I don't know that's how he ran his real estate business. That's what the mythology is, but I don't know that it's true. And it certainly didn't work with the cabinet. And what happened was that when people disagreed with him, then he ultimately kicked them out. He ultimately caused them to leave. And the number of people who left that administration, who then wrote horrible books and descriptions of the administration, is mind-boggling. It was completely ineffective, completely didn't work. Trump is not interested in diverse points of view about these things. He has a particular agenda, a particular view, and what really interests him is not what smart people think. What really interests him is how does it make him look. That more than anything else. Again, what drives, I think, Trump more than anything is narcissism. What drives him is how he appears, right? Yeah, Joe, you're absolutely right. A lot of unneeded chaos resulted, but it wasn't just chaos. It was chaos and ineffectiveness and then what happened was Trump would just randomly flip on issues and go in this direction, that direction. And Trump would actually ultimately make all the decisions, but they were haphazard and all over the place. Just, that's his mind. That's how his mind works. All right, quickly, a few other news items that I thought were interesting, and then we'll go with we'll go with the rest of the super chats. I'll do these quickly because we have a lot of super chats. Whoops, how did this get blown up like that? All right. Sorry, I've got this. Come on. All right, quick story. These are pretty horrific stories, so if you're sensitive, I warn you. This is a story that came out about this week. I think Barry Weiss maybe has written about this. I'm not sure. I read about it in the news summary coming out of Barry Weiss's newsletter. So at least to some extent you wrote about it. This is about the whole trans phenomena, and particularly when it comes to children and the idea of transitioning children, getting them on blockers and doing double vasectomies and all kind of the surgery, so completely changing them to flip them to the opposite sex, right? And what is happening in the culture in which we live, at least in parts of it, I think very small parts of it, but people, but this has immense influence on kids because it's those institutions that affect kids. There's a glamorization of the whole trans phenomenon. There's a glamorization of this idea of flipping. There's a celebration of, yay, finally, we can become who we really are by chopping off parts of our bodies. And it's really interesting if you look at the statistics that it used to be trans was mostly a phenomena of men wanting to become women. And today it's primarily a phenomenon of girls, young women wanting to become men. But anyway, Boston Children's Hospital put out a series, Boston Children's Hospital, one of the premier hospitals in the country for children, really. I mean, Boston is healthcare capital in many respects. And Boston Children's Hospital put out a series of videos, informational supposedly videos, talking about trans issues. And it really comes across as a celebration and wow, and all excited. I mean, it was so bad that they've actually taken down some of the videos now because of the backlash against this. And it's part of this propaganda. And part of this, for example, is, and I watched this video, I couldn't believe the quotes. I actually went and watched the video. On one of these videos, this woman is saying, children know from when they are born that they don't have the right sex. And one of the signs for that is they don't want to have a haircut. Like girls want long hair, boys want short hair. I mean, not that long ago we were told by the left, by the feminists, that there are no differences between men and women. Now we're told that there are deep, unchangeable differences between men and women. That they're so deep that people are born with these male and female characteristics, including whether they want to have a haircut or not. Now, I, by the way, have never met a child who wanted a haircut. None of my kids wanted a haircut, were excited about getting a haircut. I mean, you had to bribe them, you had to do all kinds of things for them to sit still so they could get a haircut. It's just bizarre. Right? Children from very young, from when they're born, they know that they're in their gender is misassigned. For example, this video says, a Boston Children's Hospital video says that playing with opposite gender toys is a sign your child is probably transgender. Now, this is insane. Insane. I mean, how many tomboys, how many girls love to play with the boys and didn't want to play with dolls? My wife is one of them, right? And then grew up to be very feminine women. This is true anti-science insanity. Complete insanity. And trans has become the militant issue of the militant left in ways that are just particularly disgusting and perverse and maddening. And this is being done and inflicted ultimately on children. Boston Children's Hospital, at some point in its defense, claimed that no, we don't operate on children. Turns out they did on 15-year-olds. As I said, nobody under 18 who is legally an adult should be allowed to transition. They should be able to make that decision as adults. This should not be celebrated. People who have whatever psychological condition, separates their biology from how they feel about themselves. This is something to feel sorry for them. This is disturbing. This is not good. Try to help them, and maybe in some cases they need surgery, but it's not something to be celebrated. It's not something to be striving for. It's not something to be encouraging young people to embrace. It is insane. And as part of this, there is the story about some academics who are now claiming, it starts with a new performance of Joan of Arc, the play, in London at the London Shakespeare Theatre, in which Joan of Arc is portrayed as neither male nor female, and where she's addressed as they, them, whatever pronouns, and as trans. The Joan of Arc is trans. And why? Why is Joan of Arc trans? Because she exhibits masculine features. She's strong. She's a leader. I mean, this is so insulting to women. This is so unbelievably insulting to women. And not only that, they're now going back and rewriting history and making all strong women in history, all leaders and who exhibit, quote, masculine traits, they must be transgender. Right? So what the left today is claiming, which should horrify anybody who was a feminist, is a feminist, tangential to feminism, that basically what the trans movement is claiming today is that women should stay in the kitchen, should have kids, should not be ambitious, should not be strong, should not lead, should not be powerful, should not be any, because if they are, then they're really men. They're not really women. Whoops. Men are strong. They're leaders. They're courageous, innovators. And women are not, should not. I mean, Ayn Rand. I mean, you want to tell Ayn Rand she was not a woman? I mean, this is not ironic. This is real. This is insanity. And there's a whole academic thing about this. So what they're really trying to do, of course, and this is the key, this is what the transgender movement is trying to do. And again, I feel bad for people who are transgender, and whatever it is, right? Their movement, what the movement is trying to do is eviscerate femininity and masculinity. What they're trying to do is eviscerate sex. What they're trying to do is eviscerate male, female, men, women. They are fundamentally and through, they're nihilists. They want to chop down all your sexual organs. They want all of you to be asexual. They want to destroy the human capacity for sex, the human capacity to identify with sex, the human enjoyment of sex. They are nihilists through and through. They want to knock and destroy and tear you down. And they are vicious. And, this movement is vicious and anti-human. Anti-human. And we're going to hear a lot more about it. Now, there's a huge backlash against this. The trans movement was very strong in England. In the UK, there's a big backlash against it. They've just shut down the big government-funded hospital that was doing all this transition surgery and everything. There's a huge backlash, again, not against transgender people, but against this movement that celebrates it, that is trying to destroy sexuality. And that's what needs to be fought. All right. All right. One other horrible story, a quick one, and then one positive story, and then we'll quickly do super chats. All right. Do you know that it's still true that all children between the ages of 3 and 5 in government-funded Head Start programs, these are pre-K government-funded programs, Head Start programs, all children between 3 and 5 have to wear masks all the time, all year, indoors and outdoors. Little children have to walk around with masks all the time. Why? Because the pre-K program gets money from the government. Now, who are these kids? These kids are all poor kids. Middle class, wealthy kids go to private programs. They don't go to Head Start programs. These are poor kids. Poor kids are being, traumatized by this absurdity. First of all, COVID's not that bad for kids. It's no big deal. Why is anybody worried about COVID with children between 3 and 5? Masks outdoors are a joke. There shouldn't be masks indoors, but masks outdoors are insane and a joke and ridiculous. I mean, can you imagine these little kids? I mean, a lot of private schools were forcing kids to wear masks up until this last school year. But this is still going on in government programs, in government-funded programs. This is a travesty. And again, another form of nihilism that the left is engaged in. Good story. Good news. Well, kind of, anyway. The FDA has finally ruled that hearing aids, hearing aids, something I'll probably need in a decade or so, hearing aids will be sold over the counter. Because up until now, for decades, hearing aids have been so dangerous and so tricky, and that we could only give them by prescription, and it was very dangerous, very difficult. I mean, what the hell? Why have hearing aids not been always over the counter? And what's amazing about this is all the news stories I'm reading about this is saying, now that they're over the counter, the market will work, there'll be competition, prices are going to plummet. They say prices on hearing aids are going to go down by more than 50%. And the technology is going to improve dramatically. You're probably going to see hearing aids at Best Buy. They're going to combine with super fabulous speakers. I mean, this is a massive step forward for people who have difficulty hearing, which is most people who get to a certain age. But if they acknowledge that it will reduce price dramatically and improve innovation, improve technology, improve everything, why didn't they do it 20 years ago, 30 years ago? And why don't they do it to everything else? Unleash the market. It works. What a shock. What a revelation. New information. All right. Kirill from the Czech Republic. Period poverty is ending in Scotland. I don't know what period poverty means. I'm not really sure how it is the government role to end such a phenomenon. I find it difficult to believe it is even a problem for women. Period poverty. What does period poverty mean? Yet people are cheering as if world hunger had been solved. All right, I'm going to leave this open to maybe somebody in the chat can enlighten me and tell me what period poverty is. It has to do with something with women's periods? I have no idea. Oh wait, I'm keeping that one on so we can re-examine it. All right, Michael asks, how can you be rich and unhappy assuming you're healthy? Well, I think most people are rich and unhappy. Most people who are rich are unhappy. Because happiness is not about money. It's not only about money. Money is a necessary but insufficient reason to be happy. I don't know what the two how they related, right? So, oh, I see what it is. Okay. Again, having some money, having a certain level of wealth, and maybe having a lot of money helps one be happy, but it's not the core of being happy. If you don't have pride in your work, you're not going to be happy. If you have a horrible relationship with your wife, you're going to be, or with your husband, you're going to be unhappy. If did I say guilt? If you feel guilty, if you I don't know, are psychologically screwed up, if you're a man who thinks they should be a woman, if you're a woman who thinks they should be a man, you're probably unhappy. There's so many reasons what people that have to do with achieving happiness. Achieving happiness is a state where all of this is in harmony, all of this flows together, all of this is integrated. All of your life is integrated, including how much money you have, is all integrated together, and where you are at whole, where you are at peace with all of it. And money doesn't contribute to that. Money is one of the things that you have to integrate in order to achieve happiness. You have to have enough of it to make all these other things integrate together. But yeah, rich people can be very unhappy because money in and of itself does not buy you happiness. All right, going back to Kirill's question. Okay, so let's take a second jab at this. So period poverty is ending in Scotland. I'm not really sure how it is that government will to end such a phenomenon. I find it difficult to believe. Okay, so period poverty is the idea that some women don't have enough money to buy tampons and to buy things that are necessary to deal with their menstrual cycle. And poor women can't buy tampons and can't buy other stuff that they need for this, pads and whatever the hygiene products that are necessary. Now, this is nuts. This is just stupidity on I mean, really, these products are not that expensive. They're not that expensive. I find it hard to believe that in a relatively wealthy country like Scotland, that poor women did not have enough money to buy tampons. Maybe they prioritized other things over tampons, but that's their choice. But I don't believe that they didn't have enough money after you eat, after you have food and rent and so on to be able to buy this. So I guess what the Scottish government does, Scotland is a very socialist place. They are now providing women with tampons, with hygiene products for their periods, so that they can, so that they never have to spend any money on it. They're making it free. Kirill says his wife pays about $2 a month on all the products, right? $2 a month. So this is a made up excuse for the socialists to redistribute a little bit more wealth, or more importantly, really more importantly, this is a made up excuse for the socialists to make us all feel guilty. Oh my God, there are poor women out there who can't deal with their periods, who can't buy tampons. I mean, what a horrible world we live in, and I haven't done anything about it, and I'm making money, and I should feel guilty about period poverty. I should feel guilty about it. That's all it is. It's complete bullshit. It's all about that, and what Scotland is doing is giving this out for free, which doesn't cost them much, but gets them a lot of, oh God, I'm so happy they increased my taxes this year, because now I don't have to feel guilty about period poverty. It's one thing off my list of things that I can feel guilty about. What did people did before tampons? Anyway, I don't even want to go there. But we live in Scotland's a rich country. What are people doing? Really poor countries. But you need to feel guilty because you and your wife are fine. You don't suffer from period poverty, and therefore you should feel guilty about your period poverty, or something like that. But it's all about inflicting guilt. It's not about solving a problem, because there is no problem. And that's the point about the left. The left is all about making you feel guilty. It's all about knocking you down. It's all about this egalitarian nonsense. And it's not about raising anybody up. It's not about solving a problem. There is no problem. It's about knocking you down. It's about making you feel bad. That's what it's about. And in this case, feel guilty. All right, let's go through these. Remember, you can still ask questions, preferably $20 or more, because as I said, I've got a lot of questions. We'll go through these questions quickly. Yeah. And I posted where we are in terms of super chat, so we've got a way to go. So feel free to pitch in with support or with questions. Either way would be great. All right. Michael asks, why are conservatives in the UK moving towards Thatcher while conservatives in the US are moving towards religious nationalism? I mean, there's a number of factors. One is it's a relatively very new phenomenon that they're moving towards Thatcher, and to the extent that they are, we'll see if they actually are. Again, Truss is running on a Thatcherite-like platform. Whether she'll actually do it or not is a different question. Whether she wins is yet to be determined. But remember, Boris Johnson moved the Conservative Party way to the left. And by moving the Conservative Party way to the left, he actually got a lot of working class voters on economic issues, because the working class voters on economic issues don't like Margaret Thatcher. So it's going to be an interesting question to see whether this move towards Thatcherism by the Conservative Party will win them elections or not. It might not. It might be a losing strategy, because the new voters that they have attracted, particularly in Northern England, industry workers, blue collar workers, I don't think they like Thatcher. So is it a winning strategy is a question. But there's a big difference between British conservatism and American conservatism, politically, between the Conservative Party and the Republican Party. I think the Conservative Party in England and conservatives in England who are more political are far more intellectual than Americans are. And Trump really put a nail in the coffin of any intellectuality around us. So Trump's Republican Party is a populist party. It's not a conservative party. It's a populist party. It's a party geared towards appealing to the masses, geared toward appealing to the working class, geared toward appealing to the lowest common denominator in many respects. It's not geared towards economic liberty. It's why it's primarily focused on cultural issues. And it has no, particularly Trumpism, has no intellectual foundation. And what Trump has done, and this is again, might be concerned about Trump, is he's opened the door to somebody to provide an intellectual foundation for what he's doing. And what you get is kind of religious nationalism. You get people stepping into that door and saying, okay, here's the foundation. We don't care that much about economics. We don't care about economic liberty that much. What we really care about are cultural issues. And we're willing to give the left its due on economic issues and willing to give in on that issue. So we want central planning because it's pro-nationalism. And then, we're willing to, and then we'll really fight it out on the cultural issues. My impression in the UK is they're much more focused on the economic issues. At least we'll see. Hopefully, the next generation. Again, Boris Johnson was a very leftist conservative. The other reason is, of course, that America is religious and UK is not. UK is part of Europe, and it's a secular culture, and the Brits are far less religious than the Americans are, and there's less appeal to religion, and there's less interest in religion, and therefore religion has a lot less weighting. So I don't think if you made a big deal out of religion in politics in the UK, it wouldn't gain you anything. America is still a religious culture as compared to Europe, and religiosity plays a much bigger role. The religious conservatives have been around for a long, long time. Now they're combining it with this new form of central planning and nationalism, which is new, but the religiosity has always been there. It was there in the Republican Party since Ronald Reagan, since the 1980s. Thatcher was secular, Reagan was not. So it was there even in the difference between Thatcher and Reagan. UK is not religious. That's the big, those are some of the differences. And, we can talk more about that once we see what actually happens in the UK. All right, Kirill is back. Thank you, Kirill. I'm reading Ominous Parallels, and it is opening my eyes. I read almost half the book in one night. It's as if I've spent my entire life with poor vision and just put on a pair of glasses and can see the leaves on the trees. Yeah, it's pretty stunning. I hope you've read Ayn Rand already, but yes, the ominous parallels. I mean, it just shows you the impact of ideas in history. It shows you the impact of ideas on our culture today through America, even though it was written in the early 80s or the 70s and 80s. And it clearly shows the evolution of ideas in Europe and how they led to the Nazis and how they led to World War II and led to communism and Nazism. Powerful, powerful, powerful book. And I don't think you can understand the world as it is today without understanding the role of ideas in history. And that's Ominous Parallels. Leonard Peikoff, Ominous Parallels. It's a must read for everybody. And then, of course, I think you should read the Dim Hypothesis, but that's a kind of a next step. All right, Jared, what's the name of the person? Oh, it was a person who had the list of 5 ways the U.S. could fall into civil war. John Hopkins? Let me just find this. Sorry, John. Oops. Sorry, it's not jumping up here. I think it's John Hopkins. Why is it not coming up? Anyway, I'll be able to find it next time, but I'm pretty sure that is the name of the guy. God, everything else is coming up except this one guy, right? It's definitely John. I can't remember if it's Hopkins or Hoskins. Hawkins. Okay, John Hawkins. Hawkins. John Hawkins. He is the guy he's the guy who wrote about the Civil War. He's a Trumpish intellectual. Okay, this is Mareko. I'm a college student. I feel as I don't have the resume as many of the Ivy League graduates to land a spot in a top financial institution. I self-study, but I don't think it's enough to catch up to them. Well, I mean, if that's true, and it is true that the top financial institutions have a strong bias towards the top universities, is that don't get a job in a top financial institution. Get one in one of the mid-level or even smaller financial institutions. Excel at that and try to advance and go to the top financial institutions if that's where you want to land up in the end. Go with that by doing a phenomenal job rather than by where you went to school, right? So it's harder. It requires you to do more work and to be better than your peers, but that's okay. It just means you have to be ambitious, and there's nothing particularly special about the top tier financial institutions. There are plenty of mid-tier and low-tier in terms of prestige that you can do a great job and learn a lot. I mean, take your first few jobs as learning opportunities. You can learn a lot. Okay, James G asks, have you heard of ArriveCan is short for Canada, app in Canada? It appears to be some type of social credit score. Have you done any shows on China's credit score system? I mentioned China's credit score system in the past. ArriveCan is not a credit score system. It's just one particular aspect that's it's basically an app that keeps track of people entering and exiting the United States. Exiting and entering Canada. Are they already keeping track of that? Because you had to give your passport in and that was digitally scanned and all the information they have on a computer. This is just an app that represents that. But the real purpose of it was to keep track of whether you're vaccinated or not, or whether you tested positive or negative or not. And to some extent, that's an element of social scoring, but it's not the full social credit system that China has. It's not even, I don't think it's even a step in that direction. It is part of the kind of COVID fascism, the kind of COVID attempt to use COVID to impose on you all these restrictions and all these constraints, and ArriveCan, that app keeps track of your entry and exiting Canada. If you're a Canadian citizen, you don't necessarily have to use the app. There are ways to get around it. So it's nowhere near as horrific as I think, again, some out there in the press would have you believe. It's still wrong, it's still bad, but it's just not quite as bad. It's not quite as scary as people would have you think it is. Okay, Frank asks, in your hedge fund, do you use sabermetrics? I read that John Henry used them in his business, and the Theo Epstein with Red Sox. Do they work? Yeah, I mean, I think they work for particular applications. You have to know what application to use them from. We do not use them in a hedge fund. They're not appropriate for our hedge fund. We have our own algorithms that we use. We don't use sabermetrics, but yeah, I mean, completely appropriate in the right context. Let's see, Hopper Campbell. Does TOS believe in open objectivism the way TAS does? I think you should ask them, not me. I don't think so, but who knows? Ask them. All right, Liam asks, are you better off having a diversified 401k than a government pension? You as an individual better off? I don't know. It depends on the terms of your pension. It's quite possible a pension is better because the government can afford to give you all kinds of goodies because they can just steal it from taxpayers. So the pension might be better. But the nice thing about the pension is it's riskless, and a 401k has risk. So in that sense, the government pension is much better. It's guaranteed. The 401k is not guaranteed. Is it better or worse for us from a market perspective, from a freedom perspective, from an individualism perspective? Yeah, government pension is immoral. It's wrong. It's a claim against future taxpayers, which creates really perverse incentives for politicians. So I would go 100% of 401k, even if it's worse for the individual from a financial perspective. Michael says, the left is telling the soul for authoritarianism from the far right. I wonder if they know what they're doing. No, I don't think they do know what they're doing. They're too obsessed with knocking stuff down to realize where this is leading. Because I think you're absolutely right that the authoritarianism will come from the right, but it's the left making it possible. And that's why you have to hate both of them. You have to fear both of them. But it's both of them. It's not one or the other. It's not one alone. Scott says, Sam Harris said he was glad the media held back Biden laptop story because it was that important to get rid of Trump. Do you agree with him? I agree with it was that important to get rid of Trump. I don't agree with him that it was I'm glad that they held back the story. I think it's a lack of journalistic integrity. I want a media that has integrity. I think that's more important at the end of the day than any particular president. But part of the point he was making, because I watched the interview, which is a great interview on almost everything, certainly with regard to Trump, I agreed with him about. And with regard to Twitter, with regard to the fact that it's a private company, and here's leftist Sam Harris making points that now many objectivists don't make anymore or refuse to make. But they have every right and should. Should exercise that right when they see appropriate. And in that sense, I think what he was saying was that all these entities were private entities, New York Times, Twitter, and all these other newspapers. And the fact that they held back the information on Biden's laptop was within their right. Now, he actually says, he kind of wavers on it. He doesn't say it. He kind of backtracks a little bit on it. But I think he's right that they were private. I think he's right that they have every right to do it, even if it shifts an election. I don't think it's very good of them to do it, particularly the newspapers, because I think it undermines their integrity. It undermines the subscribers' confidence in the journalism that they produce. I think it's bad for them in the long run, even if they achieve their short-term goal of defeating Trump. I happen to think Trump would have lost no matter what it was on that laptop. So I think it was a mistake in that respect as well. I think Trump was going to lose this election no matter what. Anyway, I encourage you to watch the interview. I think he says he misspeaks a number of times. I'm sure he regrets certain things he said, that Sam Harris said, but except for this particular issue and for something about there could have been anything on Hunter Biden's laptop, even, I don't know, children murdered or something like that. I wouldn't have cared as long as Trump didn't get elected. I mean, that's over the top and ridiculous. But I agreed with him on his diagnosis of Trump as a cultural phenomena and the danger Trump poses to the United States, to our system of government, to our freedoms, to everything about America. So I agree with his evaluation of Trump, and I know that qualifies me and him for as TDS, which is an anti-concept, of course. But it is, there were some other issues where I thought Harris was quite good, but he rambles. God, he talks so much and doesn't say anything. As Kiro says, he kept calling Trump selfish. Of course, I don't agree with him on that, but again, think about his understanding of selfish. His understanding of selfish is what it means is, lying, cheating, stealing, SOB. It's not our understanding of selfish. So, but that's Sam Harris. I mean, he doesn't have an understanding of what self-interest means. He has a very, very stilted understanding of morality. So I don't agree with him on morality. I don't agree with him on a lot of things. But in this interview, at least his analysis of Trump, with the exception of using that word, I thought was spot on. Mark says, do you know Edward Klein, the author? He seems to have been influenced by Ayn Rand, and I like his books, but I never heard you mention him. I found his Sparrowhawk series to be interesting. Yeah, I used to know Edward Klein. I used to know him quite well. Not quite well, but I used to know him. He was an active objectivist for many, many, many years. I think he still considers himself an objectivist. We had a huge falling out. So he hates my guts. He said some horrible things about me. We had a huge falling out, I don't know, I think even before Trump, because I refused to say that the biggest threat to America was Islam. I kept calling it Islamic totalitarianism, radical Islam, jihadism, and all these things, and he wanted me to condemn Islam and to view Islam. He was very anti-immigration, I think, over the Islam. I think that was the case, so I might be wrong here, over the Islam thing. So he hated my immigration stance, even though I've said that in the right context I would be pro-banning Islamic immigrants, but that's a whole other question. I'll do a show on immigration soon, so we can cover all that. And then I think over the Trump issue, I think over the last, he called me names, cut me off, denounced the Institute, denounced me, and went in his own way a few years ago over Islam, which Islam is going to take over the world. Islam is the biggest threat we face. Immigration, and then ultimately Trump, which kind of brings it all together. Although Trump, funnily enough, did nothing to secure us from this threat, the real threat of jihadism, or the pseudo threat of Islam. Did nothing. All right, sorry, unrelated. How does one stop procrastinating? I think the best thing, Ram, is to go back and find my show that I did with Gene Maroney. I did a show with Gene Maroney a couple of weeks ago, and we talk about happiness, but we talk about procrastinating, and I thought she had some good tips. But the real question is, she doesn't like the word procrastinating. Part of the question is, why do you procrastinate? What is it you're trying to pull off? What is the reason for that? Is this an activity that you need to do today? Is it, are you just guilted into you have to do it early? Should it be? I mean, question the whole issue and then question the activity itself and figure out psychologically what is driving you. That's what you need to do to deal with procrastination. You have to understand why you're doing it. And maybe you're doing it for good reason. And maybe you're doing it for a bad reason. But then if it's a bad reason, then you have to really introspect and think through why you're letting this bad reason have a hold on you. And you need to let go of the bad reasoning. But I definitely encourage you to listen to the show because she covered it there. Colt Savage says, I'm sorry, I sound like a MAGA bro, make America great bro. But most of those polls are not good. I still think the GOP will win the Senate narrowly, despite picking terrible candidates, although I could be wrong. Yeah, I mean, as I said, I could be wrong, right? And the polls could be wrong. The polls have been wrong many, many times. So let's wait and see. But I do think they picked horrible candidates. I think they had the opportunity to win big, and I don't think they're going to win big. And the reason they're not is because they picked lousy candidates. But let's wait and see. And I don't think because you disagree about polls or about my evaluations, you sound like I'm Make America Great bro, because you're not defending, you're just observing factually about reality. You're saying, from my observation, people are probably going to vote Republican more than the polls estimate. That's not a Make America Great anything. That's just you making an observation about the world. And that's valuable. All right. Last question, and then I'm off, right? And we'll see if the hotel doesn't cut me off before I finish this. Michael asks, every European I talk to makes fun of us for school shootings and homelessness. What's a good comeback? They're right. I mean, it's horrible. America's in deep shit. I mean, homelessness problem is a disaster, and school shootings are a disaster. And they're both caused by statist policies. One, to some extent, both are caused by a lousy public education system, one that does not teach Americans how to think and how to deal with thoughts. But they're absolutely right. It's a disaster. And homelessness is a socialist policy which prevents America from building enough buildings to homes to match demand, and it's a supply demand mismatch that causes people to be homeless. They can't afford their homes. America is not capitalist. America is not perfect. America is not the country that you or I think, are advocating for. We're not pro the America that is today. We're pro America as it's the ideas of America which suggest America should and needs to become. All right, guys, thank you. We've made up all the questions. We're way behind on the super chat the last few shows, which tells me that these early shows are at least not bringing up enough viewers to generate the kind of super chat that we need in order to make our numbers. But anyway, maybe we'll make up for it on future shows when we get back. I'll be on vacation, I think, for the next week or so, not doing any shows. I think for the next week or so, it might turn out that I am doing shows. We'll see. But in any case, have a great rest of your summer. I'll see you at the end of the month. And don't forget, if you like what I do, if you want to support what I do, if you want to support the Yaron Book Show, become a monthly contributor at yaronbookshow.com/support, Patreon or Subscribestar. Really, really appreciate you being able to do this. It is the best way to support us. And of course, if you can increase your support on one of these platforms, you're already a supporter, but you can increase it, please do so. It would be very much appreciated. Thank you for the 600 plus people who support the Yaron Book Show. Really appreciate you. Thanks, guys, and see you when I'm back. Bye.